All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Creative Insights webinar. Tonight, we are your hosts, myself, Shanda Aiken, and Martha Montiel. We are the founders of Horizons and the Outdoor Photo Alliance, and Martha is the troublemaker between the two, my partner extraordinaire. I'm going to
No.
be doing the speaking tonight, and Martha is going to be doing the Q&A and the crowd control behind. Um, after each presentation, we'll take questions. So during the presentation, if you have questions, feel free to go ahead and fire away in the Q&A. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll ask the speaker any of your questions, and then we'll move on to the next one. And then at the end, if you have, any questions in general for any speaker that you may have thought of in the meantime, anything about Horizons, the conference, Durango, shoot, ask away, at the end. That would be fantastic. Today we have Luke Dre with us.
Hey,
He is a partner from Mute Workshops and one of our illustrious sponsors for the Fall Photography Conference. And Luke Dre is a partner at Mute Workshops. Welcome, Luke.
thank you. Yeah, just a little tidbit from us. We're really excited to be supporting the Horizons Photo Conference. We've got Matt, Wayne, and Taylor, Matt Payne, Wayne Suggs, and Taylor, who's on this call, also speaking at the conference. And basically, Mute Workshops, we run about 80 workshops around the world every single year, focusing on landscape photography, wildlife photography, and cultural photography all over the world. We do about 50 in the US and the rest everywhere else. Yeah, I'll let you carry on.
Awesome. Thanks. And it was wonderful, Luke, getting to meet you and a bunch of your team members in Arizona just a couple of months ago. You guys really have an awesome team. It was very visible just meeting you all because you kind of don't see the behind the scenes, when we see people face to face. But I just had this feeling, this team vibe.
It's a
Um,
huge team. Yeah, we have
mhm,
about 12 staff photographers. It's a
mhm.
big
Awesome.
operation.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Thank you, everybody in the audience. Thank you, our attendees. We see many of our attendees are registrants for the Fall Photography Conference in the audience. Welcome. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today. Speakers, thank you very much for taking your time to be here today as well. And we'll go ahead and start off. Weibo, would you start us off this evening with your creative insights?
Okay. Thanks, Shanda. Thanks, Martha. Um, my name is Huibo Ho. I'm based in San Diego, California. Thanks to everyone who's attending tonight for this webinar. So let me get my screen share started. Does everybody see it well?
Looks good.
Okay. So, um, so again, my name is Huibo Ho. Most people know me as a black and white landscape photographer. And I always think black and white really excels when combined with simplicity because they both seek and extract essence. Together, they often lead to a stronger visual and emotional impact, with each enhancing the other. Over time, I found myself increasingly drawn to simplicity, constantly thinking about how to simplify a scene when I compose. Like in these images from the sand dunes in Death Valley National Park. And here are a few images from Iceland. And I also shoot in color. So here are a few simple, clean color images. We probably all think we understand what simplicity means for landscape photography. For example, we often define it quite straightforwardly as minimizing number of subjects in a composition. But keeping things simple doesn't necessarily mean we've achieved simplicity effectively. So today I'm going to talk to you about a relevant concept called dynamic simplicity. Let's see. So here, I first learned this term, dynamic simplicity, from Freeman Patterson's book, Photography and the Art of Seeing. And there he says, let me go find the right one. I think I lost it. So basically, he said, if everything is as simple as possible, then things will be very boring. Simplicity brings in order, but we need to balance order with tension. But too much tension creates hyperactivity. So a good trade-off is to strive for is to somewhere in the middle. That is what he calls it, dynamic simplicity. And to achieve this, he suggested 5 secondary principles as for this visual design. They are dominance, balance, proportion, pattern rhythm, and he calls distortion, which I may say perspective. I don't think Mr. Patterson intended to have these as rules to follow. Rather, these are few things for us to consider when we work with simplicity. Actually, Patterson's book itself exemplifies his very principle. The book is simple and efficient, yet very effective and mentally stimulating for readers. Of course, I won't repeat his words in details here. Instead, I'd like to share my own understanding of this concept through some of my photographs. Simplicity to me is not just about reducing number of subjects or keeping the composition or textures minimal. More importantly, I think it challenges photographers to use our trained vision to figure out how to extract with the fewest necessary elements to portray something interesting about the landscape, and then deliver the image in such a fashion that is both visually and mentally stimulating. If we just simply isolate a single subject and take a straight-on shot, the image can be simple, but it doesn't necessarily achieve a very thoughtful and captivating simplicity. So the first point listed here in his book is dominance. This often, although definitely not always, involves having a main subject, focal point, and a clear center of interest in the composition. For example, a lone tree or solitary figure, so on and so forth. But is simply doing that enough? So consider the next 2 photographs of a lone tree. And this is a vertical one, and this is a horizontal one. And I took both photos in Yellowstone National Park. And both images are very simple, and that I can feel the silence and the solitude, particularly from the photo shown here. However, I also feel they are missing something. Perhaps they're just a bit too generic or too straightforward, lacking certain visual interest. So now consider this next photo of a lone tree, also taken in Yellowstone National Park. I feel this image holds more visual stimulations and is able to better convey that silence and solitude of Yellowstone winter. And several elements contributed to that. Beyond this stark contrast in size and tones between this tree and its background, there are other subtle nuances that made this image a bit more interesting, particularly this patch of light clouds in the sky almost mirrors this line of the slope below, adding a subtle touch of visual interest, and helped to make this image a little less cliche and a bit more special. This is also a simple tree image, but has a visual relationship between the foreground branch and the background tree. The placement of the foreground branch here and the way it faces the tree and the way how the branch of the main tree in the back twist and bend, and especially this small branch curving towards the foreground branch, effectively pulled the image together. It feels as though they are interacting with each other. The composition is simple, but has a balanced tension. This is also a tree photo, a group rather than a single one. Yet the scene stays simple with the help of fog. The foreground tree here is clearly the dominant main subject, but the background trees are just as important. They created layers, depth, that made the image far more engaging than it would be on its own. So you might ask, how do I know a simple image has this so-called quality of dynamic simplicity? It's very hard to quantify the answer, but for me, one of the criteria is this. Can the image hold the viewer's attention beyond a quick glance? Can it make them linger, ponder, and want to spend more time absorbing everything in the image despite the simplicity? I often use this image as an example to discuss balance and perspective. First, if I were to use one word to describe the essence of this composition, it would be balance. A good composition usually conveys a sense of harmony, and this image makes me feel that. The shape of this curved road created a very strong geometrical quality, and its alignment with the background mountains contributed to that balanced feel. Additionally, I feel this image conveys a sense of space and perspective as well, achieved through the layers of these gradually receding darker tones from the very dark tones in the foreground to the lighter tones in the distant background. It is a simple image, but it holds plenty of visual interest. So composing with simplicity doesn't mean we settle for any simple forms. It is about using our vision to extract something interesting about the landscape and then effectively composing them in a way that is balanced, cohesive, or even better, intriguing and creative, while using fewest elements possible. This is another photo I took in Iceland. The essential form of this photo is in the size proportion between the foreground shape formed by this patch of grass and the dome-shaped hill in the background. I had to step back and forth to find the best perspective to create a composition with a balanced proportion. I didn't want the shape of the grass to be too dominant, but if it were too small, it would lose its visual interest. And this would be considered as a classic minimalism image, very clean, very simple. Yet this gentle S-curve helped to guide the viewer's eyes, added a subtle perspective, and made the image less boring. Not all images require a dominant singled out subject. Simplicity can also be found in the rhythmic patterns. Rhythm can be created by repeating patterns or elements. Freeman Patterson said in his book, rhythm brings in both order and a sense of dynamic to a photograph, just as it does to a musical composition. In this photo, the essential form lies in these repeated V-shaped layers. Despite a lot of details and textures, the photo maintains a sense of order and simplicity through the repetition of these uniform patterns. And here is another image that contains a rhythm created by these shadowy ripples of sand. The image is simple, yet the interplay of this contrast and lines conveys a quiet sense of both movement and stillness. I love photographing these dried remnants of desert plants in the sand dunes and always try to find different ways to compose them. Here in this small scene, even the right side only has a very small object in an open background, it is able to balance with the darker left side because an isolated object usually can carry more weight. Also, I carefully left symmetrical space at the left here and the right edges to complete the balance in the composition. So to wrap things up, simplicity isn't just about keeping the composition minimal. A photograph, no matter how simple it appears to be, still needs to have some design. A design that can give a hint about the photographer's thoughtfulness, intention, and sensibility behind it. So going back to what Freeman Patterson said, simplicity brings order to a photograph, and we need to balance order with tension, which brings movement, activity, and a sense of dynamics to our pictures. That is dynamic simplicity. So when we work with simplicity in our landscape photography, it may help to think in terms of this concept and remind us simple but not simplistic. And that's it for me today. And I hope to see you all in Durango this fall.
Wow, wonderful. Thank you, Weibo.
You're welcome.
I have a quick question, really quick, if I can just jump in. When you approach a scene, do you automatically think or visualize in black and white, or do you anticipate potential color, potential black and white, and decide later? Or do you have a vision ahead?
I always shoot in color. I actually do not use the black and white mode, although a lot of people find it helpful for them, but I always shoot directly in color. But most of the time I find myself visualizing most of the time vaguely, but sometimes pretty clearly about the final image in my head or in my mind's eye, and most of the time is can be black and white.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oops, sorry, my microphone was off. I don't see any more questions. I have a questions, or I have one question. So what kind of choices does the photographer have to make or create a really, well, I guess you can explain that, but like a simple but impactful image?
How do you define as being impactful?
I guess more like where it kind of creates like an emotion, like a stronger emotion.
Yeah, so specific for like a black and white for me, and it's actually very hard to quantify it for emotion point of view, but for me, when I view an image, especially a black and white image, if suddenly, I was thinking about that day, if suddenly the world becomes a little quiet, and that's what I know, where I know this is a very, that's an impactful image, at least for me.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All right.
Any
Thank
other
you very
questions?
much. Okay, we'll jump right into the next presentation. Michael.
All right, let me share my screen. Give me 1 second. And can everyone see this?
Yeah.
So today I just want to talk briefly about using photography mantras and how they can be a valuable tool for us as we, progress as photographers. And if you're not sure what a photography mantra would be, it's any like nugget of advice or wisdom that you glean from reading about photography, listening to photography podcasts, going to in-person photography presentations, anything that kind of resonates with you that kind of makes you think more about your own practice that you can then carry with you into the field with you. And so early on in my career, when I first started in the early 2000s, one of my big inspirations was Galen Rao. And he had I sort of bought his books and I read them from cover to cover. And I gleaned a couple of these photography mantras along the way. And one that has stuck with me all these years, 25 years later, is to expose for your most important highlight. And As a younger photographer learning the craft, this initially meant, because I was shooting with slides and film, which was a much narrower, exposure latitude, that when I meter the scene, I want to make sure that I am going to use an exposure value which is dark enough to include detail in my highlights. So and this practice served me pretty well early on. These are some older photographs where I use this technique of, these are obviously fairly high contrast or very high contrast, high dynamic scenes. And to make sure I detail my highlights, I would use spot metering or center weighted metering for the mountain or for the yellow band of clouds in the llama pictures on the left below, just to make sure my exposure is not too bright. You don't want to blow your highlights out. If you're going to sacrifice one, you should sacrifice your shadows over your highlights. And the secondary benefit that I discovered by using this technique is that it did drop my shadows into deep, luxuriant blacks. And at times I really like this effect. You can see these deep shadows are basically black in these images. And to me, that added a dynamic engagement with my viewer and for myself. And I feel like that really strengthened each of these images. So nowadays, of course, we have these modern camera bodies, and these sensors have a much larger dynamic range exposure latitude, and we can more easily recover shadow detail and highlight detail while post-processing. And if the scene is extraordinarily contrasted, we can also do exposure bracketing to make sure, if we wanted to, we can have all the detail we want in our shadows or in our highlights. And so each of these images were taken within the last 7 years or so. And again, I still use Galen's mantra to expose for my most important highlight. And I don't always do this nowadays, but when I do, it's for a couple specific reasons. It's to, well, the biggest one is to simplify. Looking at these images, the top right, the vine maple glowing in the sun, this is a really prime example of using this technique to simplify an otherwise very, very busy scene. So this is from the redwoods, and it was later morning and the sun was getting pretty bright. And if you were standing in front of that scene, behind it in the shadow was still that very convoluted forest. So it's a lot of distracting information that is behind this vine maple. The vine maple happened to be in the sun, and the stuff behind it was in the deep shade. So I knew if I created a darker exposure to bring out the colors and the details that are in those leaves, that maybe it would drop the information behind this vine maple into deep, dark shadow, and then in effect simplify the scene. And that's exactly what happened. So I still use it from time to time. Now, this mantra still lives with me, and over the years, it's kind of evolved and kind of morphed to mean something a little bit different. So I started thinking more about that word highlight and what else it could mean besides just the brightest areas in your frame. And to me, became more around what are the most important visual highlights? Like looking at a larger scene, where are those little pockets of visual interest that I may want to seek out, or they may want to explore photographically, either by walking towards them or by maybe getting out to longer lens. And so this is more of a field study, like a case example from being in the field. This is Mount Shuckson in the North Cascades of Mount Washington. And my friend and I did a couple-day backpacking trip to this lake. And we were really excited because the lake just happened to be breaking up, or the ice and snow cover just happened to be breaking up. We were anticipating it being just open, clear water. But when we saw the ice breaking up, we really just thought that would add a nice other element to work with photographically. And so from our campsite high above, the mountain itself is very complex. It's very horizontal. So I really like mountains that have a very, sharp and, distinct profile. And this really wasn't cutting it from this exact perspective. But there were some things I started noticing. So I thought about the whole idea of what are the visual highlights tucked away within this broader, larger scene. And one little thing that stood out to me was this section right there. Now, I should probably step back and just say, I also was thinking about what are the essential elements of the scene. And the essential elements are the water, the reflection, the mountain, and the ice. So I want to see if I can create a composition which is concisely and simply incorporating those different elements to tell that story of this trip more directly to my viewer. And so this is one idea. I was just kind of experimenting with different compositions, and this is one that I saw. And this is one of the images that I came home with. And even within this composition, I saw something else that kind of I wanted to play around with. This little section right there. I kind of like the way the two shelves of ice where the trees were reflecting in the middle of that. I just kind of like that look. And I ended up photographing it the next day and then inverted it so the trees are standing straight up. And this is the resulting image. It's an okay image. I'm not a big fan of it. But this is the same broader scene from our campsite. And again, where other visually interesting places I can maybe build a composition around. And I also like this little section right here. And so the next day when the light was a little bit more strong, I created a composition and a photograph, which is this. And to me, this is such a very simplified, very direct and concise way of telling the story of that backpacking trip. It has the mountain, has the nice direct light, has the breaking up ice. And so it kind of combined all those elements to show it, these mountains and this experience in a very different way for me. And it all goes back to that whole idea of exposing for my most important highlight. In this case, my most important visual highlight. And so that is my tip for today. If you have any questions, I would be glad to hopefully answer them.
Wonderful. Thank you very much,
Very
Michael.
nice.
Nice. I think that's one of my favorite images that catches my attention when I look through your work.
The last one?
Yeah, there's just something special about it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It's so cool how you can just like simplify it again using the simplicity theme. It was like you just like narrowed it down to your head. For some reason I never thought about that. That is so cool. I
Yeah.
love that.
Mhm.
Yes.
It also just takes standing and looking, observing. It's not like I always sat there and stood there and just noticed it right away. It was just kind of taking in the scene and see what's really grabbing your attention and just exploring and experimenting and playing with it and see what happens.
There's actually a question from Ann Collins, and she says, because you zoomed in so much on those areas, do you focus stack?
I did not need to focus stack there. I can't remember the exact focal length, but I believe I was able to get it in one shot. I am 98% sure that that did not require a focus stack. That's a really good question because oftentimes as you get above 150 or 200, you may really, depending on how far away your subject matter is, you really may need to consider focus stacking or pay very, very precise attention to where you focus and checking your LCD, your image after you've made the exposure to make sure you got enough of that depth of field in that you need to have.
Awesome. Do we have any other questions? I think that's it.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
Right. Thank you, Michael. Taylor Stone.
Hi guys, I am excited to be speaking to you guys and hope to see many of you at the Fall Photography Conference. I am currently based in Las Vegas, Nevada, where it is roasty toasty. So I am dreaming of this fall foliage. Hopefully many of you guys are as well. I decided to take a little bit of a different approach, and instead of talking about composition or like mantras, I want to talk about a tool that many of us have in our toolbox that we don't always use effectively in fall. I teach a lot of fall photography workshops, and I often encounter people who don't realize how useful a polarizer can actually be when photographing fall foliage. So I wanted to introduce this concept and kind of hopefully inspire you to whip out this tool and put it to work with this upcoming fall season. So I wish that I had had the thoughtful insight of doing one of these before and after shots with fall foliage specifically, but I didn't. So we're going to have to use our imaginations. But in this image, it's just a very simple image of a waterfall, but you can tell that the glare is just really overpowering it. And you can see that the glare is not just on the water and the rocks, but it's also on the leaves themselves. And by simply spinning a polarizer with no other editing, these are just raw files, you're able to see how that tool can actually strip away a lot of the glare in an image and reveal the true colors and textures and patterns. So as another example, you can see that all foliage, all leaves, whether it's lily pads, maples, you name it, I promise every leaf has a waxy coating on it. And what happens is that waxy coating, it creates glare in your scene, especially if it's a cloudy day or if it's very sunny outside. And that glare will obscure the true color and texture of the leaves in your image. So the lily pads make a great example because they're very, very waxy. So it's a nice exaggerated example. But here you can just see that by just simply spinning a polarizer, it can remove that glare and reveal the true colors that are actually in the leaves. And so even though this is not a fall foliage example, you can imagine the impact that this could have on your fall photography. So let's talk about some different ways that you can put it to work in the fall. So one of the things that polarizers do is it takes glare off of wet surfaces. And while you're out exploring fall foliage this season, you'll probably encounter some streams, wet rocks, and any other damp surfaces, or even just water on leaves themselves. And if you want to be able to remove that glare so that it removes that distraction from your scene, applying a polarizer is a really good and easy way to do that. And these are the types of effects that cannot actually be replicated with editing. So there's nothing you can do when you edit that will replicate the effect of just having a polarizer in the field. And so there's a lot to understand about how to align a polarizer correctly, and we won't dive too deep into that. But I would just shorten it up to say that just if you apply your polarizer in the field and rotate it, you will be able to see the effect. And I always just look for wet or dark areas, and you'll be able to see that change happen as you spin the polarizer, and that will help you understand when and how to align it. Another good use of a polarizer is that it can really clean up your reflections for you. So not only does it reduce the glare on the leaves, but it will also reduce the glare on water surfaces. So I know one of the best things to do in Colorado with fall foliage is to go to a nice lake and have that perfect aspen reflection. I can't tell you how much I love doing that. And if you have a polarizer, you're able to remove some of the glare distractions that are in the water surface. And it can be a really nice tool for you to break out, and it can help clean up those reflections for your final image. And of course, a polarizer also has the effect of slowing your shutter speed, or it can help you slow it just slightly. So one thing that I often like to do if there's moving water around is I want just a tiny bit of motion blur, and just adding a polarizer not only saturates the color in the leaves, but it also allows me to slow it to maybe like 1/10 of a second or 1/4 second, which is just enough to get the motion in the water. So you can actually use it not just for removing glare in the scene, but also as a creative effect in your image as well. And of course, I always love small scenes. So a polarizer is a really amazing tool if you're doing small scenes with fall foliage, because you really do want to get a lot of the color out of your leaves, and it can help remove a lot of that distraction and reveal the true colors of your subjects. Now, of course, one thing to consider is that it's always a creative choice. So there's plenty of reasons why, for example, you may not want to remove glare. Perhaps the shine is enhancing the image, but this is just simply providing a tool for you to consider using. So it always comes down to your creative choice in the field and whether or not it's providing the effect that you had intended. And of course, if you are photographing any sweeping scenes of fall foliage, you'll probably encounter some atmospheric haze. And so that can happen when there is haze caused by the vast distances that you're shooting across. And a polarizer will actually help reduce that atmospheric haze and reveal more of the color that's in the landscape itself. I remember this morning, it was extremely hazy, and the polarizer was such an essential tool in being able to reveal all the colors that were in the landscape, because otherwise it looked extremely washed out. And the polarizer was able to help me end up with a final image that I was quite happy with. So those are a couple of just scenarios. We talked a bit about reflections, removing the waxy glare on leaves. We talked a bit about slowing shutter speed and using it for grand landscape or for small scenes as well. And so if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you. I don't see any
I have a
questions.
question for you, Taylor.
Sure.
Do you ever have difficulty with the blue skies and
Yeah.
tempering the blue, and how do you work with that?
That's a really good question. Yeah, so it requires a bit more of an in-depth presentation, but I often do talk
Okay.
about banding. So that patch of blue in the sky is called banding. It happens when you have a wide angle lens. Generally, the sun is quite high in the sky, and you have like a blue sky with nothing else going on. So it's important to identify that drawback in the field, but as long as you have a complex scene or textured clouds, the banding is generally not visible. It's only visible when you have like a fairly blue sky with no other things to fill it up. Yeah.
Okay.
Chris Bailey
Thank
says
you.
that's a good, really good advice, because he always forgets, he or she, to use the circular polarizer.
Yeah, you'll be amazed. Actually, I should have put like a little tip on there. My very favorite tip is that if you're shooting fall foliage, sometimes it can be hard to see the effect of the polarizer because leaves are small, you know, so it's hard to see the change. And most of our cameras nowadays have a magnify button. So if you have your composition and you're having difficulty seeing the change, you can use the magnify button and magnify in on just the area that you hope to see it, and that will help you align the polarizer. So yeah.
And then Cheryl says, do you stack it with an ND filter?
You definitely can. Yeah. So I do that quite often when I'm photographing streams or waterfalls. So yeah, it's just a tool. It's a tool that most people are told to include in their toolbox. If you're a landscape photographer, everyone tells you that you should have a polarizer, but oftentimes you're not really taught the effective use of that tool, or like when to use it or when not to use it. And so I hope that this inspires people to break out this tool and kind of experiment with it, especially during the fall, because the saturation of your fall foliage colors can be really amazing.
Thank you. Have you ever overdone it? Like where you're like, okay, I shouldn't have done it.
Well, sometimes you want the shine on the leaves, right? And sometimes that's part of the photo. Like you want the reflected light on it, or you want the reflected light on the water. So it's always just a creative choice. Just because you have the tool doesn't mean you have to use it every time, but you should experiment with it and see when you like it.
Yeah, with the digital age, you can just delete photos, right? Like you just take.
We have plenty of film.
Thank
And
you.
Jim from NISI is going to be at the conference, so we're really excited about that. So we can actually get our hands on him and bring our cameras and kind of try, some out and see, what we think. So that's going to be fun.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. So wrapping us up tonight, Sarah Marino.
Well, I'm so glad to be here, and I am so looking forward to the conference in October. Shanda and Martha hosted the Outdoor Photography Alliance Women's Conference in February, and it was one of the best conferences that I've been to. The speakers were excellent. The attendees were so fantastic. I left feeling very inspired and Like I met a lot of really interesting people. So I know that October is going to be exactly the same. So super excited. I will
Thank
get my
you.
PowerPoint going. Get
Thank
the
you,
right
Sarah.
one. Let's see. Of course, Zoom is blocking where I start my slideshow. So bear with me. Okay, so I am going to talk today about the labels that we give ourselves and our creative identity. And I don't have a lot of photos in this presentation, so I will include my website link at the end in case you'd actually like to see more of my work. But I wanted to talk more about the mental side of photography because this is what I'm going to be talking about at the Horizons Conference in October. So I wanted to give a little snippet of one of the things that I think is the most important part of our work as landscape and nature photographers. So I think of the mental side as being three essential things. And the first is mindset. And I think of mindset as how you show up. So the attitudes that you bring with you, the habits, the worldview, your frame of references, your attitude. So are you in a good mood, a bad mood? So all of those things I think fall under mindset, and I'm going to talk mostly about that today. And then another piece of the mental side is what you see. So the more deeply that you see the natural world, the more opportunities you'll see for photography. And each of the speakers tonight talked about that in a different way, different ways to observe little details that can improve your photography, or seeing subjects in a new, fresh way, or just seeing details that could turn into a photograph. And then the third piece of the mental side that I always think about is simply connection. If you see photography as a form of personal expression, how you connect with the natural world is a really important thing to tune into, because the subjects that emotionally resonate with you and photographing those things in a unique way, I think are that's one of the best ways to help make your photography say something about you rather than just say something more general about where you were standing. So overall, I think these are some of the most important things related to my own photography, and that's why I decided that I wanted to talk about the first one today. And we're going to start with a kind of strange thing. So these are photos of some pizzas that I made, just iPhone snaps. And this started at the Crested Butte Farmers Market, where I was teaching some photography workshops a few weeks ago. And we went to the farmers market, stood in line for a really long time to get a pizza, and we got one with cherries on it. And so I loved it. I went home, cooked it, and so it had caramelized onions, Gruyere cheese, thyme, chili flakes, and again, cherries. So I was telling my friend about this pizza that I made and how much I loved it. And she said, "Oh, this slide is not in there." She said, "I'm just not a cherries on pizza kind of person." And it made me think of something that I hear a lot in photography workshops and teaching webinars like this and publishing ebooks and those sorts of things. I get people getting in touch to talk about how can I become a better photographer? And I often hear things like this, where they say, "I'm just not that creative. I'm a left-brained person. I don't have that much of an imagination. I don't have an artistic bone in my body, or I'm too old to learn new things." So these are all labels that these people have given themselves. And these labels can really inhibit creativity. They can become self-fulfilling prophecies. So if we tell ourselves that we aren't creative, it might mean that we're never going to try anything new. We're never going to try new challenges. We're never going to go beyond where we are currently, which can lead to creative stagnation. And the thing that I want to emphasize most, and I'm going to give an example of this, is that these labels can keep us from ever pursuing fulfilling new paths that we could not currently imagine, because we see ourselves as the type of people who don't do that kind of thing. It's just those things about how we talk about ourselves and how we see our self-concept. And I'm not going to read this whole quote, but I thought this was a really helpful thing from this Journal of Creative Behavior that wanted to see, like, are these labels something that actually affect our behaviors? And yes, they found that it's not just, that there's a pretty strong correlation between our self-concept and how we perceive ourselves, and then our creative practices. So if you see yourself as a creative person, according to this particular research, it can affect your creativity in terms of how you behave and how you perform. So just simply reframing how you think about yourself can help you potentially practice your photography in a different way that might lead to examining creativity in a new way or different paths. The performance issue or behavior that always comes to mind for me in teaching photography a lot is openness to trying new things. And that's an example that I'm going to share tonight. So being or becoming a creative person can look like some of these things. So first, it's just being open to trying some new ideas and new approaches, that you are open to playfulness without concern about results. And another speaker that is going to be at the conference, Beth Bulow, I think she's one of the best people out there right now who does this so well. The playfulness in her work comes through. And I think that playfulness shows that she's willing to try a lot of new things. She's experimenting a lot and trying many different techniques, many different subjects, and it results in a really creative and interesting body of work. And I get the sense that she's not always super concerned about getting a photo, but instead about the creative process and that playfulness. So I think that's a really important part of being a creative person. You're willing to see many paths instead of just one or two. And for us as landscape photographers, I think a really important part of removing some of those labels is that we can see many correct answers at a location and not just one. So instead of showing up to a place and thinking, this is what I'm there to photograph, there are many ways to interpret that place and communicate it through your photography in a creative and personal way. So I'm going to give an example. So finally, we have some photos and a photo talk. This is from Death Valley National Park, and I was teaching at a conference there a few years ago. And I think most of the participants showed up to photograph scenes like this. So dramatic light over the sand dunes with a big sandstorm swirling sand up into the air. So very dynamic, exciting scene. And then I took one of my excursions to this spot. So this is one of the washes that leads through a pretty nondescript landscape. And I said, we're here to photograph plants. So I think a lot of people would say, but I'm here to photograph this. And you can show up to a place like this with a person like me as the instructor and say, I'm not a plant photographer and I'm disappointed and I'm not going to try. Or I haven't tried this before, but I'm open to it. So one of the participants on this outing told me when we started, he said, I'm not really a plant photographer and I don't even know where to start, but he was open to it. And so these are my photos. But by the end of the time with me and then the end of his time in the park, when he went back to the same spot a few more times, he then sent me a message as a follow-up and said, I'm now a plant photographer. I would have never expected to enjoy this line of work. I would have never considered that particular place to have any photographic potential, but he was open to trying new things. So when you think about that label, I'm not a creative person, it can be so simple to reframe it just by being open to going to a nondescript place and seeing what you can make of it, like this example in Death Valley National Park. So my few little pieces of advice that I would encourage you to consider. So try the cherries on the pizza. Be the type of person who tries the cherries on the pizza because you might really like the cherries on the pizza. I certainly did. Try photographing the plants. You might not see yourself as a plant photographer or an architectural photographer or an abstract photographer. You might not really think the intentional camera movement is for you. But give it a try. You might find a completely new, exciting line of work for yourself. And please work on seeing yourself as a creative person, because by doing so, by just switching how you think of your identity and the labels that you attach to yourself, you could start approaching your photography and the world with a completely different mindset, and you might be really surprised where that takes you. And again, since I didn't include a lot of photos in this talk, you can go to my website, which is smallscenes.com, and you can see more of my work. We're about to switch over to a new website with a lot of new work. So thank you. I'm done.
That's exciting. Thank you, Sarah.
I want to try cherries on a pizza.
Yeah, it's so good. So good. Peaches on a pizza. I just made today for lunch, I made peach and tomato and garlic and such and such over a piece of bread with some ricotta cheese. Who puts peaches in that? It was great.
It sounds amazing. Yeah. Beth Youngs is like, yeah, pizza. Okay, Jackie Sullivan says, Sarah, do you use a macro lens to get your plant images on the last slide? They are beautiful.
Yeah, generally I do use a macro lens, so a 100 millimeter f2.8 macro lens, but I also use a 100 to 500 lens. So the Canon mirrorless system has the benefit of the 100 to 500 focuses really closely. So you can, it's not a macro lens for sure, but you can use it as such. So those are the two tools that I use most often for my plant photos.
Awesome.
Thank you. Chris
Sarah is,
says,
oh, sorry.
Chris Belly says lemon slices, pepperoni equals happiness. This was really thoughtful, provoking. Okay, and Beth was saying this is my favorite plant lens. Beth Young is she was a speaker at our women's conference, and she does a lot of beautiful flower photography too. I don't see any more questions.
I have a question, Sarah. Of
Okay.
course, I always have questions. How would you say somebody would, I could see these as kind of mental barriers, that we've created for ourselves, and maybe even risky. So what would you say to somebody who's worried about risking their time or their images for creating something that isn't so great or isn't, something like you would create?
I absolutely think for people who have limited vacation time and are only able to do 1 or 2 trips a year, that the feel of risk or fear of failure, that's totally legitimate, which is why I always say try to practice a lot in really low pressure places. So we went on a walk by the river near our home this morning, and it was just bursting with opportunities. And it's just this very nondescript riparian area and down in a little canyon. And that's the type of place that I would encourage people when they're at home between trips. Just find a local wildlife refuge or a botanic garden or an open space where you can go and practice a lot, so that you feel less pressure when you're on your trips. So even in those nondescript places, you might be really surprised at the skills you can develop and the photo portfolios that you can develop. So practice when it's low pressure so that you have the skills and the tools, more tools when you are in those situations where you feel like you really want to get it right.
Awesome. Great advice. Thank you, Sarah.
And I think that actually, like, I love your advice of being open-minded, because once you do that, it's like all the pressure goes away and you're just kind of free to play and do whatever, and nothing works out.
Yeah, like it's easy to go for an hour down to the river and just play with intentional camera movement or multiple exposure. And then I have those tools, like I know what works, I know what doesn't. And then when I get into a place where I might be able to use those techniques, I can try them. Or like if you've never worked with shallow depth of field, so the plant photos that I showed in my talk are all shallow depth of field. So that's something that takes some time to get used to. So practice. You can buy flowers at the grocery store and just practice in your kitchen.
Exactly. I have a question, but it's actually for like this is a general question. Kathy says, Huibo will be sharing her post-processing at the conference, and she says, beautiful work and thank you to all the presenters. It's very inspiring.
Oh, thank you.
So Weibo, in your presentation, will you be sharing any of your post-processing?
Yeah, I definitely plan to show some of the major steps.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions for any of our speakers that you thought of now, or anything else, whether it's the conference or fall colors or Durango or Colorado, anything else that anybody has questions on before we wrap up today?
There's just like some comments here saying thank you for all like the presentations. It's very inspiring, sharing your expertise and love of photography. Thank you so much. This was really great. 4 a.m. comes early. Oh, okay.
Joining
So
us
this
from
person's
somewhere
leaving.
else. Yeah, 4 a.m.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody's just saying thank you. Wait, hold on. Can we access some of the conference if we can attend? Can
Let's
we?
see, I can answer one question, one of the first ones here. Will the full schedule of the conference be shared soon? Yes, we're actually pulling together some of the details. We have some sponsors, we had some ideas about some things. The general kind of overall schedule is out there, it's published. But for all of those who registered, we're going to send an agenda here really soon. And so that should come out, I think, a week or so, right, Martha, as we're
Yeah.
kind of tying up some of these loose ends. And then to access some of the conference if we can't attend, unfortunately, this is very in-person centric. That's kind of that idea or the motivation behind our conference, and particularly this one. It's rare that we get to see each other face to face. So Martha and I actually are about almost a foot in difference in height. But on video, you would
Don't
never
need to
know
point that out.
who's the tallest.
You're
But
the
it's
tall one,
so,
Martha.
That's right.
but it's one of the wonderful things that we really that we all need. I mean, we in 2020 we really moved to this whole online concept to make these things work, and it's fantastic. And there is opportunity, like this webinars and seeing each other, through the camera. But there's just something so incredibly special about meeting in person. And that's what we're really looking forward to. We absolutely love that. In our conference in February, it was, it was somewhat magical actually. And so it's very in-person centric.
So yeah, so if you
Great.
guys can attend like the full conference, you can definitely buy a ticket and attend whatever time you can. But we're not selling like partial tickets, if that was the question. And then somebody else asked if this recording will be available if they missed the beginning. Yes, it will be. We will post it on our website.
Yep, if you can go to our website and just check out our blog, and it's usually 2 or 3 days. We'll have it out there so you can go back and view the whole thing if you missed portions of it, or if you want to go back and take a look at some of the details again.
And we will be sending the link on our newsletter as well. So for those who missed it. But yeah, everybody says thank you. Great presentations, a lot of inspiration. Thank you,
All
guys.
right, so to wrap up really quick, thank you all for being here today, speakers. We are so excited to meet you face-to-face in October. I think it's one of the things we're most excited about is getting that, like I just talked about, that in-person, face-to-face contact and connection that we as humans, look forward to, and we're really excited about that. Right here in Durango. So if you ever have any questions about Durango or even traveling here, feel free to email us, hello@horizonsphoto.com. Maybe that's something that you have questions about. There's places to shoot no matter what direction you're coming from. Durango is the mecca of photography opportunity in every direction, no matter where you're coming from. So if you want to jump in the car and take a drive, there's places to photograph both here and 1, 2, and 3 hours away from Durango. Let's see. Our presentations are all brand new. So this is something unique to Horizons this year. We have brand spanking new presentations that haven't been heard or delivered anywhere else. And we're really excited about that. And let's see, is there anything else?
I want to
That's
say
it.
thank you to Look for joining us today. They were sponsoring this this webinar today, and yeah, so thank you for popping in. I know we know you're going on a trip, but we appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, all right. We look forward to seeing you all in just a few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.